We have spoken in the last couple of days about the evolution of the Nazis' decision-making process and how they finally decided that the only and final solution to the Jewish problem was the use of murder. That decision was put in the hands of this man, Reinhard Heydrich, sitting here at his desk, and he in turn put together a plan and called a meeting, which, as we saw, it was held at the Wannsee Conference Center on January 2nd of 1942. At that conference meeting, the final decision was made in terms of how this would be done, the construction of death camps, the use of poison gas, and so on. So we look at this construction of the final solution, and ultimately the decision was made to build 6 death camps. These are not concentration camps. Concentration camps were built, as we've talked about, for detention, for labor and forced labor, slave labor purposes. Yes, there was killing that took place there. Yes, there was people that died there. The conditions in the concentration camps were indescribably atrocious, but the death camps were something a little bit different. These camps were designed for the efficient extermination of the Jewish people and other enemies as well. We should note that ultimately the death camps were responsible for about 1/2 of the deaths of the Jews during the Shoah. The rest died, whether it be at the hands of the Einsatzgruppen and others wielding guns, the deprivation of the concentration camps, and so on. The death camps were only one piece in this puzzle, but clearly a major piece as well. The ultimate decision was made to build 6 different camps, and these are names that you want to be familiar with. Would I expect you to memorize the camp names and be able to recite them? No, not necessarily, but you should know those names, recognize them as something different than a Buchenwald or a Dachau or whatever the case may be that were concentration camps. The death camps that were constructed, as I say, number 6. The first of them that was built was at a place called Chelmno. All of them built in parts of what is now Poland. After that, Sobibor was built. The third one that was built was Treblinka. Treblinka was one of the larger camps. It was fed by several major cities, including the city of Warsaw. There was Belchek, one of the other camps, Majdanek, and of course the most infamous of all, the Auschwitz-Birkenau complex. That one is a little bit more complicated because Auschwitz technically was more than one camp. There was a slave labor camp at Auschwitz as well as a death camp, which was called Birkenau. And so those were the 6 camps that were built. Majdanek was a little bit different than most because it was really a dual-purpose camp. It was a concentration camp and execution center, and in one single place. Auschwitz, as I say, was technically the labor camp, but it was then fed into Birkenau, which was the death camp that was built. The other 4, Chelmno, Sobibor, Treblinka, and Belchek, were just death camps. All of them, except for Auschwitz, were built as temporary facilities. Auschwitz was the only one that was planned as a permanent facility. Others had much lighter construction. They were much easier to ultimately tear down and destroy because they weren't going to last indefinitely, as was the Auschwitz-Birkenau complex. The process started with the roundup of the Jews and their isolation in the ghettos and the concentration camps. If you're going to control these people, if you're going to march them off to death camps, you need to get them under control, you need to contain them in one place and do it efficiently. And to do that efficiently and then be able to move them efficiently required breaking their will right away. One of the readings that you've been asked to look at tonight is a piece by a psychologist by the name of Bruno Bettelheim, who was a survivor of the camps. His piece called The Informed Heart talks a little bit about how that was done, and so as you read his piece you might want to think a little bit about how control was established and how people dealt with that. But the ultimate process was built and designed to be one of industrial efficiency. Basically, the Industrial Revolution run amok for want of a better term. The raw materials were to be brought in. In this case, the main raw material was the inmates themselves, the Jews. They were processed through the system, everybody into the system, and coordinating with the various agencies and so on was a fellow by the name of Adolf Eichmann. And Eichmann becomes the man a technocrat, basically, who designed the industrial process that became the death camps. Eichmann himself had been partly trained as a mechanic when he was young. He worked in sales for a number of years until ultimately he became a career Nazi. And that became where he really found his niche, if you will, in society. It was his job to plan how to move the maximum amount of people and material in the minimum amount of time with the minimum amount of effort, this industrial efficiency to make the whole thing work. And ultimately, when he was captured years after World War II ended, he fled originally to Argentina, where he was sheltered by the government there, and the Israeli agents eventually tracked him down, seized him, and brought to Israel for trial, the one man who was ever actually executed in the history of the State of Israel. But during that trial, at one point, he was asked to describe the process as he designed it. And he asked for colored pens and paper and proceeded to, that night in his cell, write a perfect flow of material diagram with straight lines and special compartments, a kind of a chilling, cold approach as he talked about the industrial process that he had created to do this. The system was built around not telling people the truth. When people were rounded up, they were told to bring tools with them, that they were relocating, that they were cleaning facilities, that this would be temporary, things like that, which would minimize the resistance. After all, despite the rumors and the stories, why would they tell us to bring our tools and things like that if they were just going to murder us? That wouldn't make any sense. And so people, willingly is a little bit strong, but quietly at least, went along and reported as told. They were loaded onto trains, or whatever the case may be, taken on horrific trips. We'll talk about that a little bit in the next day or so, and eventually would arrive at one of these 6 death camps. And even there, the deception was maintained in order to assure that people would be cooperative and relatively peaceful as they attempted to move them to their death. For example, when the inmates would arrive at Treblinka, they would get out of the trains at what had been built to look like a fake railway station. It was kind of like a Hollywood lot with facades. They had buildings and stations and storefronts and so on, so that when you first got off the train, it didn't look like you were in some kind of a camp. It looked like you had been moved into another city. And hold out the hope, therefore, that things really weren't as bad as you had been led to believe they might be. All of these camps were put near rail lines. That way the people could be brought to the railheads relatively efficiently. You could load them quickly and move them again with minimal disruption. But it's important to note just how massive an operation Eichmann was running here. It is estimated that at the peak of its operation in 1942, about 60 to 80% of all the rail traffic in the entire continent of Europe was being used to transport Jews to the death camps. There they would be put in a camp in which Eichmann had arranged for custom-made equipment that would be more efficient in handling the disposal of bodies and so on. In some cases, there were standard models of things available, but for example, there was no crematoria designed for the kind of volume that they were putting through these camps. It took special construction of crematoria that could handle the heat and the continuous flame and so on that they were being subjected to. The whole process, as I say, was an industrial one. Not only did you have the input of the prisoners coming in, but you recycled what you could out of them, including the items that were taken from the prisoners, their hair, their personal belongings, and so on. Even the ash was ultimately used as fertilizer so that nothing would be wasted. This was the concept. This was the death camps that